I didn't know a relationship could end without a breakup conversation, without shouting, without slammed doors, just a quiet moment where trust evaporates and never comes back. For me, it happened in a parking lot, under the dull yellow lights of an apartment complex I thought would soon be my home. I was supposed to be excited that afternoon. Ryan had called me at work, his voice buzzing with anticipation, telling me to come over after my shift because he had something big to show me. I spent the entire drive imagining practical things. Maybe he'd found a great deal on furniture for the apartment we were planning to move into. Maybe he'd finally picked a couch. Something responsible. Something that fit the future we'd mapped out together down to the last dollar. Instead, I pulled into the lot and saw a massive offshore fishing boat sitting on a trailer, gleaming like a bad joke. White hull, blue trim, twin engines, brand new tires on the trailer. It took up 3 parking spaces and every ounce of certainty I had about my relationship. Ryan stood next to it, hands in his pockets, smiling like a kid on Christmas morning. "That's mine," he said. $80,000. That was the number that landed in my chest like a weight I couldn't breathe around. We were 1 month away from moving in together. We had a spreadsheet, his idea, detailing rent, utilities, groceries, savings, debt payments. Every line item had been discussed, agreed upon, and balanced carefully. I had taken on a second job to make that plan work. I had sacrificed weekends, sleep, and comfort because I believed we were building something together. And he had just blown it up without a single conversation. What shocked me wasn't just the purchase. It was how easily he dismissed my questions, how quickly we became my money, my decision, how calmly he told me it would all work out, even though he hadn't done the math yet. Standing there, staring at that boat, I realized something terrifying. He had already decided I would help fix this, whether I agreed or not. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry in the parking lot. I just told him I wasn't moving in anymore. And when I drove away, I didn't know it yet, but that decision would be the first time I truly chose myself. I'm 29, and for most of my adult life, my relationship with money has felt like a constant negotiation between survival and shame. Not the dramatic kind of shame people talk about in movies, more like the quiet, everyday kind. The kind that shows up when you check your banking app in the grocery store aisle and start adding things up in your head before you even reach the register. The kind that makes you tell yourself, "Next month I'll do better," while knowing you've said that every month for years. I worked as an administrative coordinator at a hospital. Steady job, decent benefits, decent coworkers, the kind of work that makes you feel useful without making you feel seen. On paper, I made about $48,000 a year. In reality, it never felt like enough because I carried debt like a second spine. Student loans from a nursing degree I never finished, plus a car loan on my Honda, plus credit cards I leaned on too often when life got tight. Some months, all I could manage were minimum payments, and I'd lie awake at night doing mental math until my thoughts blurred. Then I met Ryan. We were introduced through mutual friends about 3 years ago. It wasn't love at first sight. It was easy, natural, like meeting someone who fit into the rhythm of your life without forcing it. We got to know each other for about 6 months before we officially started dating, and by the time we did, it felt like we were already building something. Quiet dinners, long talks, weekends spent bouncing between our apartments like we were testing out what it would feel like to share a life. Ryan lived near the waterfront in an apartment that always smelled faintly like clean laundry and cologne. I lived closer to downtown in a smaller place that never felt fully settled. He worked as a sales manager at a marine equipment company and made around $78,000 a year. He had this disciplined, almost obsessive relationship with budgeting, spreadsheets for everything, categories for every dollar, color-coded cells like his. Life depended on staying in control. The first time he showed me one of his spreadsheets, I remember feeling a weird mix of admiration and embarrassment. Admiration because he was so organized. Embarrassment because my own finances felt like a messy drawer I refused to open. Ryan told me early on that he'd spent his 20s digging himself out of debt. Business degree loans, credit cards from stupid decisions in college. He talked about it like a lesson he'd already graduated from. By the time I met him, he was basically debt-free, except for his 2022 Ford truck payment. And he said it casually, like it wasn't a big deal. He never judged me for my situation. That was one of the things that made me trust him. When I admitted I was drowning a little, he didn't lecture me. He didn't shame me. He just offered help. "Let me show you something," he said one Sunday morning, sliding his laptop toward me at his kitchen table while he made coffee. The steam curled through the air, warm and comforting, while he explained budgets the way some people explain recipes, step by step, patient, confident that if you followed the process, you'd get a result. 6 months into dating, I picked up weekend shifts as a receptionist at a dental office. It added about $29,000 to my annual income, and suddenly I wasn't just surviving, I had a chance to breathe. With both jobs, I was bringing in around $77,000 total. Ryan and I sat down and mapped out a debt payoff plan. 3 hours, numbers, timelines, small milestones that made the future feel real. According to the plan, if I stayed disciplined, I could be debt-free in 4 years. And for the first time in my life, I believed it. I paid off one credit card within 5 months, then another. My student loan balance dropped. My car loan shrank. Every time I made an extra payment, I felt something inside me unclench, like my life was slowly becoming my own. Ryan loved that version of me, the version that was improving, focused, responsible. He told me he was proud of me. He'd kiss my forehead when I showed him a new balance update, like it was something romantic. Around the 1-year mark, he started talking about moving in together. At first it was casual, money saved on rent, less commuting, more time together. But over months, it turned into real plans, browsing apartments online, discussing neighborhoods, even talking about engagement a year or two after we're settled. 8 months ago, we made the budget for living together, a 2-bedroom apartment for $2,000 a month. Everything split down the middle: rent, utilities, groceries, internet. Personal debts stayed separate. The spreadsheet showed we'd each have about $650 extra per month compared to living alone. We even picked a move-in date, October 15th. We gave our landlords notice. We started talking about furniture, and I thought, this is it. This is the life we're building. Then September happened. Looking back now, I can see the cracks forming long before the boat ever appeared in that parking lot. At the time, though, they didn't feel like cracks. They felt like quirks, like personality differences you tell yourself are harmless because everything else seems so solid. Ryan liked control, not in an overt, domineering way, at least not at first. It showed up subtly, wrapped in logic and spreadsheets and phrases like, "This just makes the most sense." He liked knowing where every dollar went. He liked planning months ahead. He liked certainty. And because I'd lived so long without any sense of financial safety, I mistook that control for stability. There were little moments that should have made me pause. Times when he'd review our shared budget ideas and adjust numbers without mentioning it, then explain afterward why his version was more realistic. Or when I'd suggest spending money on something small, a short trip, a concert, even a nicer grocery run, and he'd smile and say, "Let's see how it fits the plan," like the plan was a living thing we had to obey. I told myself that was just who he was: organized, practical, careful. As moving day got closer, the conversations shifted from if we'd move in together to how everything would work once we did. Ryan started talking more confidently, more decisively about our future. He'd say things like, "Once we're living together, it'll be easier if we streamline," or, "When we combine households, we should think long-term." Sometimes the way he said it made me feel like the decisions were already made and I was just catching up. I noticed he'd stopped asking as many questions about my comfort level and started assuming alignment. When I'd push back gently, he'd reassure me. "We're on the same page," he'd say. We want the same things." And maybe that was true, at least in theory. There were also moments involving his family that left me uneasy. I'd only met his parents twice, and both times were fine on the surface. Polite, pleasant. But there was an undercurrent I couldn't quite name. His mom had asked a lot of questions about my job, my debt, my plans, in a way that felt more evaluative than curious. Ryan brushed it off afterward, saying she was just old-fashioned. "She worries," he told me, "but she'll come around once she sees how serious we are." I wanted to believe that. As September rolled in, the pressure increased. We were finalizing logistics, moving trucks, storage, what furniture to keep. Ryan seemed more energized than ever, almost restless. He talked a lot about the life he pictured once we moved, weekend plans, hobbies he'd have more time for, things he'd put off until later. He started spending more time online, scrolling through listings for things I assumed were for the apartment. When I asked what he was looking at, he'd grin and say, "Just dreaming." I didn't push. I wish I had. The night before he called me to come over, I remember lying in bed feeling oddly unsettled, like my body knew something my brain hadn't caught up to yet. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about the lease we'd signed, the future income projections, the sacrifices I'd made to get here. I had reshaped my life around discipline because I believed we were building a shared foundation. What I didn't realize was that Ryan had started imagining a future where my discipline existed to cushion his impulses. At the time, though, all I knew was that something felt off, like the ground under our carefully planned life wasn't as solid as I thought. The next afternoon, when he called with that excitement in his voice, I still believed whatever he wanted to show me would fit inside the plan we'd made together. I had no idea that he'd already stepped completely outside it. Ryan called me on a Thursday afternoon while I was still at work. His voice was bright, too bright, the kind of excitement that crackles through the phone and makes you smile automatically, even before you know why. "You have to come over after your shift," he said. "I've got something to show you." I asked him what it was. He laughed and dodged the question, telling me it would be better as a surprise. My mind immediately jumped to practical things. Maybe he'd found a deal on a couch, or secured the apartment we'd been eyeing, or bought something for the move. Something responsible. Something that fit the future we'd been carefully planning. I finished my hospital shift at 5:30 and drove to his place, still smiling, still optimistic. That optimism died the moment I pulled into the parking lot. Right in front of Ryan's building, taking up 3 spaces like it owned the place, was a massive offshore fishing boat on a trailer. White hull, blue accents, twin motors gleaming under the lot lights. The trailer had brand new tires. Everything about it screamed expensive, impulsive, and completely out of place. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Ryan was standing beside it, hands shoved casually into his pockets, like this was the most normal thing in the world. I got out of my car slowly, my heartbeat loud in my ears. "Whose boat is that?" I asked, already dreading the answer. He grinned. "Mine." I laughed reflexively, waiting for the punchline. "No, seriously." "I am serious," he said, still smiling. "I bought it this morning." The words landed wrong, heavy, disorienting. I stared at the boat, then back at him. "What do you mean you bought it?" He launched into an explanation like he'd been rehearsing it. He'd been browsing listings for a few weeks. Found this one at a dealership 2 towns over. A 28-foot offshore fishing boat with twin motors, a GPS system, a premium sound system, custom rod holders, a live bait well. He rattled off features like a salesman pitching a dream. I barely heard him. "How much?" I asked. 80,000, he said, like he was telling me the weather. I felt something cold spread through my chest. $80,000? "Yes," he said, nodding. "It was a great deal." I asked him if he was joking. He wasn't. He explained he'd financed it through the dealership, signed the paperwork, and driven it home that afternoon. No hesitation, no pause, no conversation. I asked him why he didn't talk to me first. That's when his smile faltered. "It's my money," he said, his tone shifting. "My decision." I reminded him we were moving in together in 1 month. I reminded him of the budget we'd created together. I asked him how he planned to afford both the apartment and the boat. "I'll figure it out," he said. "What does that mean?" I asked. He shrugged. "I'll adjust my budget." I asked him if he'd factored the boat into the moving-in budget. He admitted he hadn't, said he hadn't planned to buy it yet but couldn't pass it up once he saw it. We stood there under the parking lot lights, going back and forth. I kept my voice calm, even though my chest felt tight. I asked practical questions. How much was the monthly payment? Insurance? Storage? Since the complex didn't allow long-term boat parking? He didn't have answers, just reassurances. "It'll work out. You're overthinking it. Most girlfriends would think this is cool." That comment stung more than I expected. I told him I wasn't moving in with him anymore. He blinked. "What?" "I mean exactly what I said," I replied. "I'm not comfortable moving forward when you make a decision this big without even mentioning it." He said I was being unreasonable. I said I was being smart. I walked back to my car with my legs shaking, not from anger, but from clarity. I drove home in silence, replaying the conversation over and over. That night, I called my landlord. My apartment hadn't been rented yet. I asked if I could stay. He said yes and sent me a new lease. I signed it the next morning. Ryan called me 12 times that weekend. I ignored most of them. When I finally answered on Sunday night, he apologized, sort of. Said he got caught up in the excitement. Said he still wanted me to move in. I asked him one question. Did you return the boat? No, he said. I can't. I already took delivery. I asked if he'd looked at his budget with the boat included. There was a long pause. Yeah, he said finally. It's tight. That was all I needed to hear. The days after that conversation felt strangely hollow. Not dramatic, not explosive, just quiet in a way that made everything echo. Ryan and I barely spoke for 2 weeks. He sent a few texts, nothing confrontational, mostly small check-ins that felt more like temperature tests than real communication. How are you? Can we talk soon? I responded politely but briefly, careful not to reopen a door I wasn't ready to walk through. During that time, I spent a lot of nights alone in my apartment, sitting on my couch with my laptop open, staring at the same budget spreadsheets I'd once felt so proud of. I ran the numbers over and over, not because I needed to, but because I was trying to understand where things had gone wrong. Had I missed something? I replayed our early conversations, searching for clues. The way Ryan talked about his debt-free status like a badge of honor. The pride he took in having things under control. The subtle shift from we're planning together to this is what makes sense. I kept asking myself if I'd overreacted. Plenty of couples argue about money. Plenty of people make impulsive purchases. Maybe I was being too rigid. Maybe I should have given him more grace. And then I'd remember standing in that parking lot, asking basic questions about insurance and storage, watching him wave them away like details that would magically resolve themselves. I'd remember the second budget, the one he hadn't shown me yet, forming in his head, built around assumptions instead of agreements. That's when the guilt would lift, replaced by something steadier, resolve. 2 weeks after the boat incident, Ryan called and asked if I'd come over to talk. He said he wanted to show me something. He said he'd work things out. He sounded earnest, almost nervous. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I told myself I owed it to the relationship to at least listen. When I walked into his apartment that Saturday afternoon, the kitchen table was covered in papers, printed spreadsheets, multiple versions of budgets, neatly stacked like evidence in a case he was preparing to argue. He didn't waste time. He pulled out the first set and walked me through it. This is my budget if I live alone with the boat, he said. The numbers were brutal. The boat payment alone was $1,947 a month, an 84-month loan at 12% interest. Insurance was $430 a month. Storage was $215 because the complex had given him 1 week to move it. His truck payment was $520. Insurance on that was $190. Rent was $1,650. Utilities averaged $140. Phone, internet, gym, subscriptions, it all added up fast. As he talked, I did the math in my head. His take-home pay was around $4,600 a month. His fixed expenses were over $5,000. He was underwater before groceries, gas, or life even entered the picture. I pointed this out calmly. He nodded, like he'd been expecting that reaction. That's why I made the second budget. That's when he slid the next set of papers toward me. This one assumed we moved in together. Combined income. I scanned the numbers, then froze. My income was listed as $16,000 a month. I looked up at him. Where did this number come from? He said it was my current salary plus the raise I was up for at the hospital. I told him the promotion wasn't guaranteed, that it hadn't been finalized yet. He brushed it off. You've been there 4 years. You're basically a lock. I explained again that if I got it, my salary would go from $48,000 to $73,000. With my weekend job, that totaled about $12,000 a month before taxes, not $16,000. He said he'd round it up. I stared at him. That's not how math works. I asked what happened if I didn't get the promotion. He got defensive, said I was being negative, said I needed to trust the process. As I looked closer, I noticed something else. Rent was still split evenly, but groceries, utilities, and internet were weighted more heavily toward me. 60% instead of 50%. When did we agree to that? I asked. He said we hadn't yet, but it made sense since I'd be making more money. To help manage the boat payment, he added, like it was obvious. That's when it clicked. He hadn't just bought a boat on impulse. He'd bought it assuming I'd help carry the weight. I set the papers down and asked him directly, "Did you expect me to help pay for your boat?" He hesitated, said no. Then said, "Sort of." Then said, "We're a team." I told him teams communicate before making $80,000 decisions. I told him I'd worked 2 jobs for over 2 years because he inspired me to do better, not so I could subsidize his impulse. I told him I couldn't trust him anymore. And when I left his apartment that day, I knew I was walking away for good. I ended things the next day. Not in person, not with another round of explanations or spreadsheets or emotional negotiations. I sent him a text, clear, calm, and final. I told Ryan I cared about him, but I couldn't be in a relationship with someone who made massive financial decisions without talking to me and then expected me to fix the fallout. I told him I wasn't moving in, and I wasn't continuing the relationship. I wished him well. He responded with a long message, an apology, regret, promises. He said he realized he'd messed up. He said he'd sell the boat. He asked if we could at least talk one more time, face to face. I told him no. I needed space. At first, he respected that. Then the noise started creeping in from the edges. Within a week, 3 women reached out to me, girlfriends of Ryan's friends. 1 called, 2 messaged me on Instagram. They all said variations of the same thing, like they'd coordinated the script. Ryan's a good guy. Everyone makes mistakes. If you really loved him, you'd help him through this. You're being too harsh. A supportive partner doesn't walk away when things get hard. I listened. I responded politely, and then I explained. I told them Ryan didn't lose his job. He didn't get sick. He didn't have an emergency. He bought an $80,000 boat without telling me, and then built a budget around money I didn't have yet. I told them that wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. None of them replied after that. Ryan tried calling a few more times over the next month. I didn't answer. I focused on my work, my debt, and rebuilding my routine without him. I kept my weekend shifts. I made extra payments on my student loans. I poured my energy into the parts of my life I could control. In late October, I got the promotion. My salary jumped to $73,000 a year. Combined with the dental office job, I was finally making real progress. And for the first time, the money felt like mine, not a tool someone else could factor into their plans. I quit the weekend job shortly after. I wanted my weekends back. I wanted rest. By mid-November, I paid off my car completely. My only remaining debt was my student loans, down to $33,000. Through mutual friends, I started hearing about Ryan. He was struggling, trying to sell the boat, unable to find a buyer willing to pay what he owed. Someone said he'd moved into a cheaper apartment. Another mentioned he looked stressed, thin. I didn't reach out. Then I got a message from Hannah, his younger sister. I'd met her a handful of times. We were never close, but we'd always been friendly. Her message was long, careful, apologetic. She said Ryan had told their parents a very different version of events, that I'd broken up with him because I was controlling, jealous of his success, unable to handle him buying something nice for himself, that I walked away as soon as things got hard financially. His parents believed him. Hannah said their mom had gone on a rant about how cold and unsupportive I was. Their dad apparently agreed, saying I wasn't the kind of woman Ryan needed. She told me she'd tried to explain what really happened, but they wouldn't listen. She also told me something else. Ryan had always done this. Growing up, if he failed a test, it was the teacher's fault. If he got in trouble, someone else started it. He was convincing, and their parents usually believed him. She said she wanted me to know she didn't believe his version, that what he did to me was selfish and stupid, that she was sorry I'd been pulled into their family drama. I thanked her. I told her I appreciated the honesty, and I told her I wasn't interested in correcting the story with his parents. What they thought of me didn't matter. A week later, I ran into Ryan at a gas station. It was completely random. I was filling up after work when he pulled in across from me in a beat-up silver sedan. We saw each other at the same time. Froze. He walked over, asked how I was. I said I was fine. He congratulated me on the promotion. I asked how he knew. He shrugged. He apologized. Said selling the boat had been the hardest thing he'd ever done. Said he wished I'd stayed so we could work through it together. I told him there was nothing to work through. I told him he showed me exactly where I stood when he built a budget around my future income without asking me. I told him that wasn't something I could forgive. I left. That night, I made a $500 payment toward my student loans. The balance dropped below $30,000 for the first time in years. I slept better than I had in a long time. I thought that was the end. I was wrong. I thought I had already hit the lowest point when I walked away from Ryan. I was wrong. The real low came quietly, weeks later, wrapped not in anger or confrontation, but in exhaustion. By then, my life looked stable from the outside. Promotion secured, car paid off, debt shrinking. My apartment was calm, predictable, mine. I cooked dinner most nights, folded laundry on Sundays, and went to bed early. No drama, no chaos. And yet there were nights when I sat alone on my couch, staring at nothing, feeling an ache I couldn't name. It wasn't regret. It was grief. Grief for the version of Ryan I thought I knew. Grief for the future I'd planned so carefully, only to realize I was the only one taking it seriously. Grief for how close I'd come to tying my life to someone who saw my stability as a safety net for his recklessness. The first crack in that calm came through an email. I almost deleted it without opening it. Ryan's name sat there in my inbox like a ghost. I had blocked his number and social media months earlier, but I'd forgotten about email. Something made me open it. The message was long, rambling, apologetic. He said he'd been doing a lot of thinking, that he understood why I left, that he didn't blame me. And then halfway through, the tone shifted. He was struggling financially. He needed help. He asked if I could lend him $3,000 to cover expenses for the next 2 months while he waited for a commission check. He promised he'd pay me back as soon as he got back on his feet. I read it 3 times. My hands went cold. This was it. The moment I'd been bracing for without realizing it. The confirmation that walking away hadn't ended the expectation. It had just delayed it. I didn't respond. 2 days later, another email arrived. Shorter, more desperate. He said he understood if I didn't want to help, but asked me to at least reply so he knew I'd seen it. He said he didn't know who else to ask. His parents couldn't help. His friends were tapped out. I still didn't respond. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind cycling through old habits. The instinct to fix things, to smooth discomfort, to help even when it cost me. I hated that part of myself in that moment, the part that felt guilty for saying no to a problem I didn't create. A few days later, Hannah messaged me again. She didn't sugarcoat it. She told me Ryan had been asking everyone for money since selling the boat. He owed their parents $4,000. He owed a friend $1,500. He'd borrowed from a coworker and hadn't paid it back. He was still making decent money, but spending it poorly. Bars on weekends, a new gaming console, no real budget. Lending him money won't help, she wrote. It'll just enable him. I stared at my phone for a long time after reading that. Because this was the moment everything finally collapsed. The image I'd held on to of Ryan as someone who'd just made a catastrophic mistake, but could recover with enough effort, it shattered. What was left was a pattern, one I'd narrowly escaped becoming part of. A week later, the anger arrived. Ryan sent one more email. This one wasn't apologetic. It was cruel. He accused me of being cold, selfish, of never really caring about him. He said I'd abandoned him when things got hard. He hoped I was happy with my perfect life while he struggled. He said I should have known I'd leave eventually. I deleted it. Then I blocked his email. But the words lingered. For a few days after that, I felt hollow. Not devastated, just drained. Like I'd spent months bracing for impact and finally realized how close I'd come to losing myself. I questioned everything. Why had I ignored the early signs? Why had I needed this level of proof to walk away? Why did I still feel sad for someone who clearly hadn't changed? One night, sitting alone in my kitchen, I opened my loan portal and stared at the remaining balance on my student loans. Under $30,000 now, a number that once felt impossible. I made another payment, not out of anger, not out of spite, out of grounding. Each dollar I paid felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Still, that period, the emails, the guilt, the realization that he would keep reaching until every door was closed, was the darkest stretch. The moment I understood that leaving didn't automatically bring peace. Sometimes it just reveals how much you were holding together with willpower alone. But it was also the moment something inside me hardened, not into bitterness, but into certainty. I wasn't responsible for saving him, and I never had been. The moment everything truly shifted didn't come with drama. No confrontation, no grand speech, no final message that tied everything up neatly. It came on an ordinary evening, sitting on my couch, when I realized I felt nothing. Not anger, not guilt, not even sadness. Just clarity. It started with a message request I almost ignored, a name I didn't recognize at first, Olivia. The profile picture showed a smiling woman in her mid-20s. She'd written a short, polite note asking if we could talk. She said she had a question about Ryan. My stomach tightened, but curiosity won. I replied that yes, we could talk. We spoke on the phone later that night. Olivia sounded nervous, careful with her words, like she was afraid of stepping into something painful. She told me she'd been dating Ryan for about 3 months. Things had started well. He'd been charming, attentive, full of plans for the future. But recently, things had gotten strange. He'd started asking her for money. Small amounts at first, $100 here, $200 there, always framed as temporary, always tied to some upcoming commission check. She lent it to him because he seemed genuine. Then last week, he asked for $2,500. She said no. That's when everything fell apart. He got angry, accused her of not trusting him, told her that if she really cared about him, she'd help. The words were familiar enough that my chest tightened, not from pain, but recognition. She broke up with him the next day. After that, she started asking questions, talking to his friends, hearing fragments of stories that didn't quite line up. Someone mentioned he owed money all over town. Someone else hinted that he had a habit of overspending and then leaning on the people closest to him. Eventually, my name came up. Olivia asked me if Ryan had ever done something like this to me. I told her everything. The boat, the budget, the way he'd penciled in my future income without asking, the emails asking for money, the pressure, the guilt. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then she said quietly, "Thank you for telling me the truth." She told me she was relieved, that she'd felt crazy for saying no, that hearing my story made her realize she'd dodged something much worse. After we hung up, I sat there staring at my darkened TV screen, my reflection faintly visible. For the first time, I saw the full pattern laid out clearly, without emotion clouding it. Ryan hadn't changed. The context had. When I had structure and boundaries, he tried to bend them. When I removed myself, he tried to replace me with someone else who might carry the load. When she refused, he lashed out. This wasn't bad luck. It was who he was. That realization did something profound. It released me from the last thread of responsibility I'd been holding on to. A few days later, I finished paying off my student loans. The final payment wasn't dramatic, just a confirmation screen and a balance of 0. I sat there longer than I needed to, breathing slowly, letting it sink in. No debt, no obligations, no one depending on my discipline to fund their mistakes. That same week, Ryan showed up at my apartment. I don't know how he got my address. I'd moved months earlier and never told him. It was a Sunday morning. I was still in pajamas when the knock came, firm, insistent. I looked through the peephole and saw him standing there. My heart spiked, not with longing, but fear. I didn't open the door. I asked through it what he wanted. He said he needed to talk, just 5 minutes. I told him to leave. When he didn't, I told him I'd call the police. After a long minute, he walked away. My hands were shaking as I texted Hannah, asking if she'd given him my address. She said no. She didn't know where I lived. Neither did our mutual friends. I filed a police report that afternoon, not because a crime had been committed, but because I needed documentation, a line in the sand. That was the turning point. Not the boat, not the breakup, not the emails. The moment I realized my safety, my peace, and my future mattered more than being polite or accommodating. I blocked every remaining path he could use to reach me. And for the first time since September, I felt truly free. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They fell slowly, unevenly, like pieces of a structure collapsing long after the foundation has cracked. I didn't witness most of it firsthand. I heard about it through fragments. Casual mentions from mutual friends, hesitant messages from Hannah, bits of information that reached me only because people assumed I already knew. Ryan sold the boat. Not triumphantly, not cleanly. He sold it for $62,000. He still owed around $76,000. The dealership wouldn't take it back. Private buyers weren't interested in paying anywhere near what he needed to break even. Eventually, someone from 2 states over drove down with a trailer and cash, and that was that. To close out the loan, Ryan had to take out a personal loan for $14,000 at a higher interest rate than the boat loan had been. Now he was paying $340 a month for the next 5 years, on a boat he no longer owned. He moved out of his apartment. The $1,650 rent was unsustainable, even without the boat. He found a studio in a worse part of town for $980. He sold his truck and bought a high-mileage used sedan to lower the payments and insurance. The version of Ryan who once bragged about spreadsheets and financial discipline was gone. Friends started distancing themselves. People who had lent him money quietly stopped answering his calls. A coworker mentioned he'd borrowed from the wrong person and created tension at work. Invitations dried up. Group chats went quiet. Even his parents, who had been so quick to blame me, began to see cracks in the story. Ryan's mom called me once. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail saying she wanted to talk about Ryan, that she understood we weren't together anymore, but thought I should reconsider helping him during a hard time. She didn't specify what kind of help. She didn't apologize. I deleted the voicemail. Hannah messaged me later to warn me her mom was asking around for my contact information. She also told me something that made my stomach drop. Ryan had started telling people I owed him money, that I'd borrowed from him during our relationship to pay off my debts and never paid him back. None of it was true. I'd never borrowed $1 from him. Hannah said she tried correcting the story, but their parents seemed to believe him. She sounded exhausted. I told her I understood and thanked her for looking out for me. A month later, a letter arrived. 4 pages, handwritten. Ryan apologized for showing up at my door, for the emails, for everything. Then the letter shifted. He said he'd been reflecting, that I was the best thing that ever happened to him, that he'd grown, that he was better with money now, that he wanted another chance. I read it once, then I tore it up and threw it away. A week after that, Olivia reached out again, not with questions, but with gratitude. She told me she was doing well, that she was glad she'd walked away when she did, that she'd started therapy too. That message mattered more than Ryan's letter ever could, because it confirmed something important. The truth didn't need me to defend it. It revealed itself through patterns, not arguments. The last piece fell quietly. Hannah told me Ryan had moved back in with their parents. He couldn't afford even the studio anymore. They were supporting him while he got back on his feet. She said she was keeping her distance because the situation was draining and she didn't want to be pulled into it anymore. I didn't feel vindicated hearing all of this. I didn't feel relieved. I felt tired. There was a brief moment, just a flicker, where I wondered if I should reach out, ask if he was okay, offer closure. Then I remembered standing at his kitchen table, looking at a budget built around money I didn't have yet. I remembered the entitlement disguised as teamwork, and the feeling passed. My life moved forward. I opened a savings account. I put money into it every month. I watched the balance grow slowly, steadily. I took a photography class on weekends, reconnected with friends I drifted away from during the relationship, changed my routines so I felt safe again. The fallout didn't destroy him. It just forced him to face the consequences of choices he'd expected someone else to absorb. And I walked away from it all with my peace intact. I don't think about Ryan much anymore. Not because I'm trying to be strong or because I've buried the memories somewhere deep. I simply moved on. The chaos faded once I stopped carrying it. My life now is quiet in the best possible way. I wake up without dread. I check my bank account without bracing myself. I make plans that don't require contingency spreadsheets or silent sacrifices. I cook dinner, take photography classes on weekends, meet friends I'd lost touch with, and go to bed knowing no financial disaster is waiting for me the next morning. For the first time in my adult life, I'm debt-free. No student loans, no car payment, no credit cards hanging over my head. I have savings. I have stability. I have a sense of ownership over my future that no one can quietly pencil themselves into. Looking back, I realized the boat wasn't the real problem. It was the assumption behind it. The assumption that my discipline existed to absorb his recklessness, that my future income was already his to spend. That love meant fixing problems I didn't create. Walking away wasn't cold. It wasn't selfish. It was necessary. I didn't leave because things got hard. I left because I saw clearly what hard would look like if I stayed. Years of covering gaps, carrying guilt, and slowly shrinking to make room for someone else's impulses. The hardest part wasn't ending the relationship. It was trusting myself enough to believe that I deserve better without needing permission or proof. If there's one thing I learned, it's this. A healthy partner doesn't build their safety net out of your labor, your money, or your silence. They build alongside you. And when someone shows you, through their choices, not their words, that they see your stability as something to use rather than respect, believe them the first time. I don't hate Ryan. I don't wish him harm. I just don't carry him anymore. That chapter is closed. And the life I'm building now, steady, calm, and entirely my own, is better than anything I would have had if I stayed.